Today, we're covering the most extreme penalties for minor crimes in human history. Number 6. Getting whipped. In 17th century Puritan England, missing Sunday service wasn't a mistake. It was a crime so heinous that pastors used to lose their minds over it. Let's say you overslept one fine Sunday and missed the Sunday service. Your local authorities would actually drag you out of the house and whip you publicly. They would tie you to the whipping post in the town square, and you would be whipped anywhere from 10 to 30 times depending on their mood that day. And these lashes caused severe wounds that even got infected in some instances. For this godless act of not showing up to church, you'd be flogged in front of the entire neighborhood. Many of your neighbors would actually be cheering as you received your punishment. Worst of all, the Puritans believed that this penalty was for your own good. Imagine your boss whipping you for oversleeping in front of your coworkers. Perhaps that would make people want to attend Sunday service, but for all the wrong reasons. Number 5. Keel hauling. If there's one punishment that made sailors rethink every bad decision, it was keel hauling, a brutal saltwater nightmare used to punish sailors for minor infractions committed while at sea. Here's how it went down. The condemned sailor was tied to a rope, usually with weights attached, and tossed overboard. But they weren't just left to sink. Oh no, that would have been too easy. Instead, they were dragged under the ship, scraping against razor-sharp barnacles that tore into their skin like 100 tiny knives. And here's the kicker. This wasn't over seconds. Depending on the crew's mood or how much they wanted to make an example of you, they could haul you across at a slow speed enough to let the barnacles shred you to the bone, piece by piece. Survive the first pass? Lucky you, because they might just do it again. But the real horror? Drowning. Struggle too much, inhale too much seawater, or simply get stuck under the ship for too long, and that's it. Even if you lived, you'd be left with deep infected wounds and a lesson you'd never forget. And the worst part is, this punishment wasn't just given to traitors. It was reserved for the people who used to run away from ships and were then caught, or those who used to steal things from the ship. After one keel hauling, everyone was the most obedient crew member on deck, so you can't really say this punishment didn't work. But the next punishment seems inhumane for just a misdemeanor. Number 4. Drunkard's cloak. Let's say you had a few too many glasses of ale and you had difficulty walking back home, so you slept on the sidewalk or picked a fight with a random guy. Well, in the 16th century, you could be punished for it in the worst way possible. The punishment for public drunkenness was called a drunkard's cloak. It was a giant wooden barrel that you were forced to wear. Yes, wear a wooden barrel. Imagine being shoved into a keg with holes cut for your neck and arms. Yikes. And then the victims were paraded through the streets, making them feel humiliated. Let's not forget the sheer logistics of this punishment. Barrels aren't exactly lightweight. Add the hangover, the public shame, and the general awkwardness of being stuffed into a wooden cylinder, and you've got a punishment that makes the modern-day walk of shame look like a red carpet event. This delightful tradition wasn't limited to just England. Other European countries hopped on the humiliation bandwagon, proving that when it comes to dealing with drunkards, creative cruelty knows no borders. This punishment started off as a way to reduce fights and anarchy late at night, but this method was later used on women who were considered promiscuous. The aftermath of this punishment was sore muscles, a fracture or two, and humiliation for life. All this just for letting yourself loose and having a few extra shots. But this was not even cruel in comparison to this next punishment. Number 3. Amputation. In Middle Eastern countries during the Middle Ages, if you steal as much as an apple, there was a severe punishment waiting for you. These guys didn't mess around with fines or community service. They went straight for removal of the body part that helped you commit the crime. If you got caught stealing something, you were brought to the city center, hands and feet tied. Then, a man would bring out a massive sword, cutting off one or both of your hands, depending on which hand did the stealing. They also made sure to tend to your wounds, so that you didn't bleed to death. They wanted you to live a life without hands, so that you could remember the punishment and so that others could see you as an example of what happens if you steal something. The idea wasn't just about penalty, it was also about a social statement. Amputation wasn't something you could hide. Once your hand was gone, everyone knew you'd try to sneak off with that bag of dates or silk scarf. You've probably heard of an eye for an eye, right? Well, the ancient Middle Eastern version was more like a hand for a handful. It definitely was cruel and gruesome, but it did have its intended effect: stop people from stealing. Amputation was a punishment that did work as designed, unlike the next punishment that didn't even leave the victim capable of doing anything. Number 2. Flaying alive. Picture this. You're a poor farmer in ancient Assyria, tempted to pinch a bit of grain to feed your starving family. Sure, it's technically stealing, but it's just a handful, right? Well, in ancient Assyria, just a handful could cost you every inch of skin on your body, literally, because if you were caught stealing or committing other minor crimes, you might face one of history's most horrifying punishments: flaying alive. Yes, you heard that right. They didn't just throw you in a dungeon or fine you, they peeled you like an onion. Flaying began with tying the unfortunate criminal, often a thief, deserter, or someone who insulted the king, to a pole in the town square. It wasn't enough to punish you. Everyone had to watch, so they knew what would happen if they even thought about stepping out of line. Then came the real nightmare. A skilled executioner would take a razor-sharp blade and, starting from the victim's feet, begin peeling the skin off. Slowly, methodically. If you're squirming already, good. That's the point. The goal wasn't just to kill you. Oh no, that would be too merciful. The executioner took their sweet time, slicing off pieces of skin while keeping you alive as long as possible. Historians note that flaying could sometimes last hours before the victim finally died, from shock, blood loss, or sheer agony. And because the Assyrians had a flair for the dramatic, they'd often drape the removed skin over the walls of the city or nail it to the gates as a grim warning to others. Who needs a no trespassing sign when you've got a literal human leather on display? You might think this penalty was reserved for heinous crimes like murder or treason, but nope. Petty theft or disrespecting authority could land you on the chopping block, or rather, the peeling post. So, let's just be glad we're not still living in the ancient world, and this next punishment would really make you feel grateful, because it's a nightmare. Number 1. Scaphism. If there's one punishment that takes extreme to a level bordering on nightmarish, it's scaphism. Now, you might think this was reserved for the worst criminals, murderers, traitors, enemies of the state, but not at all. Sometimes all it took was offending the wrong person in power, and you would be given this punishment. At times, only stealing a few loaves of bread from the royals also landed you on this punishment, and let's just say, it's a nightmare. Here's how it worked. The unlucky victim was stripped naked and trapped between two wooden boats, basically sandwiched inside with only their head, hands, and feet sticking out. Sounds bad? It gets worse. They were force-fed milk and honey until they had severe diarrhea, making sure they were sitting in their own filth. Then came the real nightmare. Every inch of exposed skin was slathered in honey, turning them into a walking buffet for flies, maggots, and whatever else crawled in the night. And the sun? Oh, the sun played its part. Under its relentless heat, the victim would dehydrate, their bodies swelling from insect bites, open sores turning into infected wounds. Meanwhile, their own waste festered beneath them, drawing in more vermin, more disease. This wasn't a quick execution. It was designed to drag on for days, even weeks. The body rotted while the person was still alive, eaten away from the inside out. If the insects didn't kill you, the infections did. If the infections didn't, starvation or dehydration took over, but there was no escape, just a slow, torturous descent into death while your executioners watched, making sure you didn't die too quickly. Why was such an extreme punishment used? Simple: fear. This wasn't just about killing someone, it was about making a statement. Cross the wrong people, defy the empire, or even just land on the bad side of a noble, and your death wouldn't just be certain, it would be turned into a lesson. And the worst part? It worked. The sheer horror of scaphism kept people in line, making sure no one even thought about stepping out of bounds. So, which one of these punishments do you think was a little too much, even for ancient times? Let me know in the comments. Also, while you're at it, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for videos that take history to the extreme.